Well, I'm super excited. I am here today with a Utah legend, venture capitalist, entrepreneur, Greg Warnock. And dude, Greg, pleasure to be here.
I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get dinner with you a couple months ago, and it's funny because I'd heard your name in our circles so many times. So many people consider you a mentor and consider you kind of the face of entrepreneurship here in the state of Utah. And listening to you talk about entrepreneurship, I mean, you almost speak of it romantically. It means a lot to you. And so give us a little bit about why entrepreneurship is so important to you and so important that you teach other people about it.
Yeah, it's hard for me to find the moment when my interest in entrepreneurship began, but I can tell you that over time it's grown to the point that it is kind of a religion for me. It's something that I'm really passionate about. And it comes from, first and foremost, how much good it does for our communities, for our states, for individuals. When I look around us, for example, where we live here in Utah, many of the things that we enjoy, the hobbies that we have, the things that enrich our lives, come at the hands of currently active entrepreneurs who are offering those things for us as services or products. And they also come from wealthy exited entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy, and their names are on buildings throughout our university campuses and museums and throughout our communities. So it makes America and our community better places to live. When you take it down to the family level, it can provide, economic stability and self-reliance and a sense of confidence and stability that's good for families and children. When you get down to the individual, I think we're all driven by a desire to express ourselves, to make a contribution, to do hard things, to set goals and achieve them. And entrepreneurship speaks to all of that. And so I was probably in my 30s when I began feeling like I got a hammer and everything looks like a nail. And literally somebody would come and talk to me and say, I got marital problems. And I'd say, you should be an entrepreneur. That's going to fix, it could fix anything, which is, I guess I've learned that that's not true. But actually, it's a very empowering concept. It caused me to go back to school in my 40s and study entrepreneurship and the mechanisms around it, just because I wanted to be more well-informed and have a better sense of what makes it work and what challenges it. So it's been a big part of my life all the way along.
Well, it is interesting you say that because, more than anything, people need a purpose. They need that drive to what they're going to do. And if you don't feel like you're growing, you don't feel like you're contributing to society, several of the human needs to be fulfilled are not going to be there. So you can take an entrepreneur that's struggling all day long, but he probably is still getting those needs met, as opposed to maybe somebody that's helping somebody else build their dream and doesn't necessarily feel that same pull to what they're doing with their lives.
My experience is like yours in terms of the entrepreneurs that I've observed. Even when they're having a hard day and their business is kind of going sideways, they are happier in that struggle than somebody who maybe is a manager who has an entrepreneurial spirit but finds themselves in a cubicle reporting to somebody else, spending a lot of their time trying to satisfy another human about the quality of their work and trying to get a raise or a bonus or a promotion. Entrepreneurship is fundamentally different. If you can satisfy a customer, you can win, and no one can take it away from you. If you're a member of a disadvantaged class or you feel like you have things that put you in a position where you might struggle, entrepreneurship doesn't care. Nobody is passing a judgment about your work. If you can create it and sell it, you win. That's it.
No, it's so very well said. Well, you are an expert. I mean, you've invested in over 150 companies. By age 30, you were leading, running 7 different companies. But you almost didn't go the entrepreneur route, right? If we back up a little bit into your story, I know you were going to go into the coding route originally. What was it that made that original twist for you to go into business and entrepreneurship?
It's a story that's probably longer than warrants here, but I was in graduate school. I was about 27 years old, and my father-in-law was an attorney, and his practice was about connecting investors with businesses, and he had put a deal together and then left on a mission presidency for the LDS Church, and so he was going to be out of pocket for 3 years. And the investors he introduced into that company were concerned why it was underperforming, and he really, as a mission president, couldn't come home and attend to it. It's one of the rules that if you commit to be a mission president, you stay out there for 3 years. And so he called me and said, would you look into it? So I'm in the middle of my grad work, and I find myself in the middle of this entrepreneurial turnaround. And I think it was that summer that I was working on that business, and ultimately I had a hand in changing out the management team and repositioning the business for success. And that kind of lit a fire around entrepreneurship and how we win, how we lose, how we struggle, how we survive as entrepreneurs. And that curiosity around entrepreneurship has continued to this day.
So can anybody, I mean, were you weren't necessarily going to go that route. Can anybody be an entrepreneur, or do you think it's made for a certain type of behavior of person?
That's a great question. And I think in my late 20s and the most of my 30s, I believed that anyone could be. Because I seemed to be somewhat wired for it, it seemed easy for me. And I think that's how the human mind works. If you find something easy, then you superimpose that on other people, when for them they may have experiences or fears or apprehensions, some kind of grounding that makes it hard for them. And after some period of time, I realized actually life circumstances can take you out of the game. Your own fears and apprehensions can take you out of the game. Your inability to sort of commit or overcommit can take you out of it. So I no longer believe that entrepreneurship is for everyone. But boy, I think it's worth exploring. If you find yourself in a situation where you don't feel fulfilled, you don't feel challenged, you don't feel in control of your life, you feel a bit like a passenger, boy, taking a really hard look at it makes sense to me.
Well, one thing that you've talked about before is, even if you take 5 chances at something, if you fail, eventually if you get it right and it has that multiple, you come out way ahead as opposed to just sitting idly by, right? And so I think part of the game, and one thing that you've done that is fascinating to me, is the number of companies that you manage at a time, or that you have managed at a time. So I guess my question would be, why not just focus it all on one company? What was your philosophy to do multiple companies always and kind of keep that expanded portfolio?
So here's the part of the interview where I'm going to speak against the home team. So
sounds good.
Today I'm an investor, right? And so any entrepreneur or CEO or founder that would come to Mercato and seek capital, I would, in the back of my mind, I'd be thinking an important prerequisite is that this is the only thing you're focused on. I really want 110% dedication to the project that we're working on together. But think about the concept of diversification in business fundamentally. If you had a stockbroker come sit with you and he was maybe arguing for your business, he wanted to win your confidence, and so you said to him, well, what's your strategy? If he were to say to you, I found a stock, one single stock, doesn't matter what it is. If that's how the conversation went, he said, I recommend you put all your wealth in that one stock. You'd be like, conversation's over.
Yes.
Diversification is such a fundamentally pervasive and accepted principle that no one would argue against it. But the one place where we argue against it is in entrepreneurship, where expectation is that individual will be 110% dedicated to that single practice. But if you and I were brothers and you came to me on Thanksgiving dinner and you said, hey, I'm thinking about a startup, so I'm going to quit my job, I'm going to invest all my savings, cash in my IRA, and I'm going to go 110% on a single deal. You and I would spend the rest of Thanksgiving, I'd be like, hey, whoa, slow down, think about this. How can you hedge it? How can you dual track it? How can you parallel work it? How can you develop 3 ideas and run with them all at the same time early on, knowing that a couple of them are probably going to fail and you'll have one winner? Why put all your eggs in one basket? And that conversation would resonate with you. So that's why I say I'm talking against the home team, because if you come to Mercato, I'm going to tell you 110% on a single deal. But if you're an entrepreneur as a practitioner and you haven't taken other people's money and you're just working with your own wealth and resources, you should do 2 or 3 things at a time. Partly from what I said about diversification as a concept, but here's one other way to think about it. If I were to go through a time and motion study with you, and I were to just follow you around quietly all day and try to make a decision as to when I think you're doing something that's really high value, that's requiring all your skills, that you're very engaged in, and then during the rest of the day you might be doing something that's lower value. So what I know about you is you're in real estate and you're also doing this podcast. So I follow you around and you're building a spreadsheet about neighborhoods and traffic patterns for a real estate project. And then an hour later, you're on the phone with one of your investors or a buyer or a seller, and you're doing some high-level negotiating that you've spent your life training to do. And then a couple hours goes by when you're sharpening pencils and getting coffee and organizing your files. And the next thing you know, you're interviewing an entrepreneur like this. So your day is like a block diagram where there are high points when you're doing great work and you're fully deployed, fully engaged. Your mind is 100% applied to the task. And then there's these other parts. As soon as you put a second activity in there, like the podcast with the real estate, on average, you're spending a greater part of your day doing fully engaged, high-value, concentrative work because you've introduced a second concept. And if you can control one like your podcast, you can load balance it so that it doesn't interrupt your real estate. But when you're not doing high-value real estate, you can be doing high-value podcast. And that's the way I think about entrepreneurship. So an entrepreneur who wants to be doing high-value, concentrative work more often should be doing 2 or 3 things at a time.
Well, I love that concept. I know when I was building my real estate career, I always knew which activities were generating the most money, and then I was really focused on trying to hire out the ones that did
That's
not.
right.
And I did a really good job with that for a long time, but then it got to the point where I did have some extra time again. I could jump on the phones and do some more things, but my time per value, per quality of life didn't make sense to keep doing that. And that's when I started the podcast, for example. And then, I started a real estate course that helps other agents learn how to sell real estate. And so my day feels like it's full of high value activities all day now, as opposed to those lulls like you talk about. It's very fascinating.
Well, here's what's strange. If I invested in your real estate business, I'd be telling you, hey, you got to stop this podcast thing. It's getting in the way, right? But if you're somebody that I care about and you're asking my advice, I'd say, for sure, do the podcast. It's enriching your life. It's helping your learning. You're passing knowledge on to other people. For sure, do it,
Yeah.
So it's one of those strange, idiosyncratic elements to entrepreneurship that I think is underdeveloped in our conversation.
Wow. No, I think that's great. Well, you had a mentor early on, I guess, when you had that first company that you helped turn around with the mission president gone. I mean, you just had this opportunity where you were kind of thrown into the fire a little bit. From that point, walk us through your next couple of years when you're building these companies up. How are you deciding which projects to take on? How are you learning? How are you getting the experience and different things like that?
Well, you mentioned mentors. Let me comment on that first and kind of go backwards in time. So I think the person that probably influenced my life more than anyone else was Alan Hall, who was my partner in the formation of Mercato. And for several reasons. One is he was a great business partner, and that conversation took place at a time when I really needed some help. It was a time when somebody needed to reach down and pull me up by the hand. And so I'm forever grateful to Alan for one, being willing to take a risk on me and becoming my partner at a time when I needed, and secondly, being such a great mentor. He's 15 years older than I am. He's had a wildly successful business career. He has a fantastic family. He's involved in the community. He showed me what a well-rounded life looked like, and I was probably overbalanced at the time on entrepreneurship and investing. So probably the single most impactful. Prior to that, I worked with some fantastic partners at vSpring. We built something out of nothing. Myself and Paul Ahlstrom and Ed Ekstrom, Dinesh Patel and Scott Petty. Anytime you build something out of thin air, it's work to be proud of, and we worked together to build something important. That was important to me. Several of the CEOs that I've worked with and invested in have taught me a lot. Watching them from an execution and a leadership executive phase. So I stand on the shoulders of really some fantastic minds and some great work, and I'll always be grateful for that. No one really does it alone. So
right.
Those have been an important part of my journey. So the other thing you asked me was about how do I recognize things to invest in, and I really think the key is in understanding the human nature and the mind of the entrepreneur. You can find a fantastic market and have sort of mediocre leadership, find success there. But I think you're better served to find whatever market and find fantastic leadership that's able to adjust and adapt and find ways to win. My PhD thesis was on the entrepreneurial behavior or the adaptive behavior of entrepreneurs and how it leads to success. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about that, adaptation. So I look for a flexible mind. I look for a bias to act. I look for courage in decision making. I look for people who can feel comfortable with imperfect information and time pressure. And when you find those things in a bright, dedicated mind, I think you have the ingredients that enable successful entrepreneurship. The only thing you know for sure when you invest in a company on year one, that in year 5, it's going to be pretty dramatically different than year 1.
Yeah.
So the important thing is perceiving risk and opportunity, with accuracy and moving forward all the time.
Well, and I love that. The one rule I have for investing is bet on the jockey, not on the horse,
For sure.
right? Same kind of
For
thing.
sure.
You're betting on the person that's starting the company, because ultimately, like you said, that I've never thought of it that way, but no matter what, 5 years down the road, that company's going to look a lot different. So you
100% of the
better be
time.
bought into the guy that's behind the wheel.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read a book several years ago that was about passion in entrepreneurship, and it was, the main theme was, as you develop your business, find your passion and just serve that. And it was interesting that story after story in this book was about, we started building teddy bears in 3 years, and we sell chocolates or whatever. Every story was sort of like the unanticipated pivot. Mm-hmm. And it was a pivot towards passion and towards meaning, like whatever feeds your soul, like move in that direction and follow that. And I definitely believe in that. And it's summed up in your comment about betting on the jockey for sure.
Yeah. Well, can you give us an example? I know you were one of the first investor in Stance Socks, Skull Candy, Domo. You're on a lot of these different companies. Give us an example of one of these companies, of how you looked at it and why you chose, like maybe Stance Socks, why you knew that would be a good investment. I mean, obviously we can see now how big Stance Socks has gotten, but when you were the first investor, how did you look at that, and why did that one resonate so well with you?
Well, they had a really interesting early team with lots of experience and background. Jeff Pearl and I had worked together at Stance, and John Wilson, who was just becoming the president, had a strong industry experience, and he's a very credible leader. He has more informal authority than any CEO I've ever met or any C-level executive I've ever met. And so to spend time with those guys, even though they hadn't ever made a sock or sold a sock, you knew that they were going to win, and it was a good bet. My long history with Jeff made a difference. My familiarity with sort of the action sports arena because of my work at Skull Candy, that made it easier for me to understand the market. And actually, I know this won't make any sense, but at the time, it felt like one of the more sure investment decisions I've made. It was late in Fund 1 at Mercato, and we're a growth investor. It's the only time we've invested in something that could be seen as seed. And I knew as I did it, I was going to defend it for a decade, and I have. But luckily, the company's performance has met expectations, and everybody's really thrilled with the investment. So that makes it easier. But definitely, I was coloring outside the lines when I recommended the investment in Stance. But those are the things that were so compelling to me at the time.
So one of the reasons I was so excited to talk with you, when I was young, 22 years old, 23 years old, I started having a lot of success in business, and a lot of people came to me to invest in their business or their company, and I didn't really have a mentor or somebody to go to, and I was a little bit reckless, and I think the first 3 or 4 people I gave money to, we're talking early 20s checks of $50,000 or more, which for me was half my net worth each time, it seemed like. Yeah. I just made bad investment after bad investment. I quit making those bad investments once I went to business school and got my MBA and learned what to look for. But I think I have a lot of younger entrepreneurs or a lot of younger business people that listen to this, a lot that do really well in sales and are looking where to place their money. What are a couple just red flags that you can look for anytime somebody approaches you? Because it's very prevalent in Utah. People have a lot of trust in other people here. And what are some of those red flags that maybe you could help us look for, that you guys look for, or you look for to avoid making an investment?
Well, I think it's good to understand the environment that you sit in. So most angel investors who are writing individual checks into companies are a little bit disadvantaged. They don't have the experience selecting from a pipeline of company candidates. In real estate, you might go look at 30 or 40 properties to pick one to pursue. At Mercato, we look at 300 to 400 companies a year to pick one or two. Oh, wow. And I would say across the industry, venture capitalists fund about 1 in 100 things they look at. That's a good rule of thumb. So as an angel investor, if you're not looking at 100 deals to pick your one, you should know that you have a negative selection bias, that there's a probability that you're not looking at enough companies to be able to make sure that you're in sort of the top 20% of investment candidates. And then once you develop that kind of rich deal flow and you're pursuing it, you don't have enough pattern recognition history to be able to see the subtleties about investment potential and risk. It's sort of like a baseball hitter. If you've been in the major leagues for 10 years, you see that curveball coming off the fingers, you see the seams earlier. And as an experienced investor, like myself, for example, if you're asking me how do I see it, I don't see it because I'm unusually smart or well read or studied or anything else. It's because I've looked at 500 deals a year for 30 years. And it's like you, if you look at, several hundred properties a year for 10 years and somebody says, hey, I got this thing on the corner in SugarHouse, you're going to be like, I don't even need to see it. I know that, and that's the way it is with entrepreneurship for me. I know markets and geographies and entrepreneurs, CFOs. I know them by name. I know business plans and models. And I look at something and it just comes faster. So as an angel investor, you're sort of disadvantaged. So if you can couple your practice with a few other people that have similar experience and you can aggregate to enough deal flow and experience that judgment will come, you'll be significantly advantaged.
Well, it's funny that you say that because, I can look up a property and my gift now, having been a realtor for 15 years, I've sold over 2,000 homes. I know what your house is going to sell for, right?
Yeah,
I just know. I've seen so many different homes. I've seen inside, outside, where they're at, market trends, all these different things. And so sometimes I forget that people want more analysis than I give. I'm just like, I just know. It's just my gut tells me and I'm usually correct. But so
let me make this point.
Please.
So the quality of an entrepreneur leader is very hard to assess, but in a way it's like curb appeal. If somebody says to you, what's the curb appeal of that property? Like, what do you want me to give you a number? Like it's a 6 out of a 10 or whatever. It's blue. It's what?
Right.
You don't have vocabulary around that or a way to measure it. When somebody puts 2 in front of you, can you tell if the curb appeal on one is better than another? You can, but it's hard for you to rationalize or defend. That's the way entrepreneurs are for me. If somebody tells you, is that the CEO who's going to make this thing win? I have an educated guess where I'm like, probably. And if you ask me why, I'm sort of like, it's just, I've seen 1,000 of these guys. And so it's like curb appeal that way. And that's the disadvantage that a private investor has, is they just have not seen enough deals to develop heuristics and intuition around that selection. And if you have no advantage, then your math looks like this. Of seed deals that are funded, 97% won't reach harvest. So you're sort of 3 in 100. So that tells you if you want to find a winner, you've got to do 30 or 40. So if you're sort of thinking, I'm going to get into this angel investor game and I'm going to do like 5 of these things, and you don't have a statistical advantage by selection prowess, then it's possible that you'll have all losers in your portfolio. And of seed deals that are funded, 50% of them don't get a follow-on. So even some that get a follow-on don't get a harvest, but 50% of them don't get any more money after the money you put in. So you have to sort of be pragmatic about what the odds are in the space you're standing in. Try to find advantages where you can develop them and move very cautiously.
One of the things that, having studied you and kind of what you guys do here at Mercato, is one thing I'm hearing from you is if you're younger, like what I probably should have done, instead of investing in these other people, I should have invested in myself, doubled down on myself, my own entrepreneur skills. I know myself. I knew my own business. I knew my own industry. Is that kind of what I'm catching?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the first thing you should do as an individual is exploit your own human capacity and find those limits. When you do get to the point where your human capacity limits are tapped out, then becoming an investor makes more sense to me. So if you're a surgeon and you're in the operating room, 30 hours a week and you're just completely tapped out, yeah, go buy some duplexes. But if your own human capacity isn't tapped out, I would invest there first. I agree with your sentiment on that.
Gotcha. So what are a couple, you meet so many entrepreneurs, so many people are pitching you their ideas. What are a couple things that you look for in the jockey? What are a couple character traits that people can develop or that you've seen in the successful entrepreneurs are the ones that you want to give money to?
So I'm going to go to some that are less obvious, because you can go online and read 10 lists of characteristics and it'll name the first top 5.
Sure.
But how about a bias to act? That you gather information for a while, but your tendency is to go try stuff. And I think you learn more by trying stuff than you do by whiteboarding in a conference room, and you learn it in a real world way, in a way that's more applicable. So the theoretical analysis of a business plan and market sizing is all great, but if you have the choice, grab your bag and go out and try to sell something, and you'll learn more in your first couple hours of selling than you will in a conference room.
I love that. One of my first entrepreneurial things I did was I was there was an old TV show called Blind Date, and they would follow people around, record the date, and put pop-up bubbles. And I had the idea to do it in Utah, and I just did it. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I started pitching companies to invest with me, before I had even a show on TV. Eventually, K-Jazz took us, and we became their top Sunday show. But it was funny because I learned more by just grinding out and trying something. And even though at the end of it, I probably didn't make any money by the time I paid everyone else, I learned so much, and I had so many networked connections from that TV show than anything I ever could have done otherwise. And it was like, I can look back now and I kind of smile, because I think too many people get paralyzed in the idea of like, how do I make this work, instead of just, like you said, going out and giving it a whirl.
I'll tell you another one that'll surprise you. Accuracy of language. For example, today I interviewed a few people for a position here at Mercato, and I found myself focusing on how they describe risk and opportunity in their lives or anywhere in the interview. Because when you're in the business of assessing risk and opportunity, the way you describe it and the accuracy, like removing all the adverbs and adjectives and just as accurately as you can describe it, let's talk about it. Let's not try to argue each other's, persuade each other and argue each other's points, but let's just try to, as accurately as we can, take the measure of it. Some people don't have the ability to do that. They don't have accurate language. They don't live in that world, and other people do. Matter of fact, when I think back to my years as a programmer, that's one of the things that I took with me that I think is most valuable, is just how you think and how you talk. When I compare my degree in computer science to another degree, say in English or literature or philosophy, where there's not as much of a right and wrong, there's more judgments about, what do you think about this chapter of creative writing? And you'd tell your opinion, I'd tell mine, and who's to say?
Sure.
You liked it, I didn't like it, whatever.
Sure.
But in computer programming, you write 200 lines of code, and you press the go button, and if it says 2 + 2 = 5, you're wrong. And you made the mistake, and you're the only one that's going to go fix it. And I can't convince you that 2 + 2 is right.
Right.
I have to go fix it. And so you come out of a degree in computer science, and I think some of the other hard sciences, with this sense of ownership over your own thought and precision in the way you think about work and the way you approach it, the way you debug things and deconstruct ideas and break them down and analyze the component parts and then roll them back together again. Those are notions from programming that apply in investing in a similar way. You look at this complex organization and business opportunity, it's this organism, and you deconstruct it and you break it down into its component risks and opportunities, and you assess them separately. You debug them, you stress test them, you roll them back up and formulate an opinion. So I'm always grateful. Like, I'm not a programmer today, but I'm grateful for the way of thinking that's become part of me as a person that's the result of that degree. And I think that has a bearing on investing.
Well, I think what I take out of that is taking ownership, almost like a self-awareness of like realizing, look, it doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter, like either this is right or it's not. And having the self-awareness to know when you're not right, when you're not going down the right path with a certain whatever entrepreneurial idea.
Yeah, when we're in high school, at least if your experience was like mine, there's these ways to get extra credit and go complain about things and get your grade changed or whatever. In software, there just isn't. The printout either says you did it right or you didn't do it right, and there's no one to talk to, there's no one to argue with. Just do it quietly on your own or don't. No one cares. It's just your own work. So now here I am as an investor, and I have that same sense of no one is critiquing me in that same way. I seek no one's approval. I just generate returns, or I don't. It's that simple. It's our survival is at stake, and we have to generate returns. And there's no amount of whining or complaining or explaining about the reasons or the weather or the act of God or whatever. No one cares. No one's listening, man. You just produce a return or you don't.
Well, that's one of the things I always say is, like, you can play the victim card, and everyone has a reason that something didn't work out. But at the end of the day, it doesn't serve you. Yeah. Either you go get it right and you move on, or you play that victim card over and over, and it kind of hinders you from progressing in life.
Yeah.
Well, it's something that I just kind of, as you were talking, that made me think is you've kind of talked about the numbers and the figures, and I know that's a big part of when you're looking to invest or to decide on a business. How much do you go off of the raw data versus your own gut? I think your gut is some of these qualities you see in the jockey or the entrepreneur, but how much do you weigh those two different things?
I think ultimately you're measuring the jockey, and the numbers are the evidence of the jockey's prior work. And that's the way I think about it. I don't start with the numbers and then think, what does this imply about the jockey? I go the other way around and measure the jockey, and then as part of your measurement, you say, show me your body of work, and those are the numbers.
So I think a lot of people, the person that comes to them first to invest is going to be their family member or their close friend or something like that, right? Would you invest with somebody that close to you? There's got to be pluses and minuses to that. And B, what's the best way to politely decline if you don't feel like it's a great investment, but you're getting a lot of pressure?
I wouldn't invest other people's money in a relationship that I have. So when you think about Mercato, we have pension money and investor money and family office money all aggregated into a single fund, and we're looking for investment opportunities. And I feel like in that setting, I'm on the errand of the investor. I work for them. My job is to produce a return, and I wouldn't do anything that would even come close to compromising my ability to have very clear-minded, full data, well-informed, healthy decision process around those investment dollars. But like any family, I get approached from time to time from somebody who generally has a small business idea, and I will make those investments, but in my mind, they're gifts.
Got it.
If they work out, great, but I'm unwilling to sacrifice a relationship that I care about over an investment. So at the time I make the investment, I think of it as a gift. If it comes back, great. Otherwise, great. I don't invest a dollar sum amount that's so much that I'd have anxiety over it. And That's how I manage my professional life, different from my personal life.
No, I think that's great advice. And I think a lot of people, as they start to have success, especially if they've made some investments that have turned out well, that is the ultimate question, right? Is like, how can I still be a support to all those people around me and help them with their entrepreneurial ideas without having it possibly damage their relationship if something were to go south? Do you have an investment you'd share, maybe one where you just missed something, and one that maybe one of your biggest, I don't want to call it a failure, but learning opportunities, like maybe an investment you made that just did not work out where you felt like it really was going to be a great investment?
Yeah, we've all read in the news about Qualtrics, and I think it was probably maybe 2008 or 9 when we were having conversations with Qualtrics about investing there, and ultimately they had a better deal and a better partner, so they went a different direction. But this last month or two, as I've been reading about the success of Qualtrics and Ryan and the team, it reminds me of those conversations, and I actually remember exactly where I was standing when they told me we're going a different direction. I remember everything about that moment, and I've got 15 like that. This is just the one that's the most recent where
you had an opportunity to invest large sum in Qualtrics.
Or we were doing our best. We did our best to make a pitch to Pluralsight, and we were unsuccessful there as well. So in Utah, kind of in your own backyard, I can find 10 stories where I had a conversation, it didn't go our way, and ultimately they were very successful. There are others where I was trying pretty hard and it didn't go our way, and it turned out to be a disaster, and so I was glad that we were unsuccessful. So I think there's equal stories on either side of that dance card. I think the failure, the difficult spot that's been most draining and weighing heavily on me is this story about Alliance Health. A couple of years ago, a company that we invested in heavily was raided by the FBI and came close to being shut down. And
wow.
Really good work by Allison, who was working with me at the time to walk that business through a bankruptcy. She's now the CEO of the emerging entity. And there's some new investors there that are really doing a good job. We still have a small piece of it. In the end, it may work out. But I don't remember a time when I felt more heaviness and more straight up almost physical pain from the loss of other people's money at my hand. And I think that's the downside to being an investor. There are moments that are full of elation and success, but if you do it long enough, you're going to get kicked in the gut by something that you never imagined was possible. The blackest of black swans is going to jump in your pool and swim around a little, and that's what happened there. And it's it'll haunt me to my last day.
Wow. Did you do you take an active role in these companies when you invest in big companies like that?
Yeah, we always take a board seat and do every single thing we can think of or imagine to be helpful to that CEO and management team. And it gives us a better perspective on the business so that we know exactly how and when to help. But we're as active as would be appropriate at the board level. We don't run the business, but we do everything we can think of to help them run it more successfully and avoid mistakes.
Gotcha. Is there an investment that you're most proud of? Maybe not even your biggest or best one, but one where you're just super proud that you were able to see the vision of that company?
Well, I think Skull Candy and Stance both fall into that category because they were sort of counterintuitive. Maybe I had a closer affinity with the action sports community, but I think Stance is the company where I've had the most people tell me, "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" And Skull Candy would be number two, where they were like, "Wow, that's a long shot." But from where I was sitting, the attachments rates to cell phones and to MP3 players, and with Stance, sort of this underdeveloped market where basically all socks were in white six-packs in a wicker basket by the checkout stand. And I could see where Jeff and John were going, and there was no doubt it was going to be a win. So those are the two that I think I'm most proud of because they're counterintuitive. To do the obvious thing that everyone's doing is less compelling, but when you develop conviction about something that's a little bit off the beaten path and doesn't feel lemming-like, you're not in a syndication with 5 other investors, you're just alone, believing and writing a check. And when that plays out, it feels more meaningful because it took courage.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Well, I want to kind of bounce into a little bit of, everyone that knows your children speak so highly of them. You seem to be as well-rounded for a serial entrepreneur, for a man that has so many hats that he wears. You do seem to find a lot of time for your own personal life. Do you have rules around that? Do you have a system that you use that allows you to be as well-rounded as you are? Or what kind of life hacks do you have for the guest or the person listening that feels like maybe he's unbalanced in one way or another?
Well, I'll say one thing and then share one hack. I think to a large extent your children come to you with their own personalities. And a parent who suffers too much for a child who's off the beaten path, or a parent who takes too much credit for a child who is doing amazing things, probably both of those are unhealthy on some level.
Probably fair.
So I'm grateful for a lot of things in my life, but I'm not more grateful for anything than those two kids. Davis and Jensen are amazing. I had a set of meetings with them today. I love that they hang around the office, that they're close to my work. I said to them 10 years ago, if I was a bricklayer, you'd both know how to lay bricks. But I'm an investor, so I hope before it's over, you may or may not choose it as your career, your vocation, but you'll probably know how to invest because it's one of the things we'll talk about as we're driving around or on vacation or whatever, and it's turned out to be that way. So they're great investors in their own right, and I'm super grateful for them. As far as the life hack, I'll share this one thing, and you mentioned it. I think you've walked this road, but when you think about how you spend your time, especially when your kids are sort of between 8 and 18, and probably it's really important for fathers to be close to their sons during that age bracket. That's where their personalities are really shaped. How do you spend enough time with them? And, how do you make sure you get to their games and their events and their awards and their scouting things and whatever, and be a part of all that when you're so busy at work? And when you think about your day when you're in your 30s or 40s and your kids are in that strike zone, there's a bunch of things that you do that are not adding value to anyone. Sometimes you're mowing the lawn, you're spraying weed be gone on the driveway, you're taking the car down to get the oil changed or whatever. So pretty early on in life, I lifted all of that out. And what I was left with was sort of the business side, where I would try to do high value stuff, and a lot of it I've always worked more than a full week. And then the rest of it was motorcycles in the desert and football games and, taking pictures. They're picking up girlfriends for dances and all that kind of stuff. I missed actually very little of that during the years when I was really active and they were kind of in their teen years. And I also was able to put a lot of energy into work. And because I've had an admin at work and an admin at home for 10 years. And before that, I had an admin at home all the way back to when I was 35, call it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I haven't shopped, I haven't paid a bill, I haven't washed a car. And maybe there's fault in that. Maybe it would build my character to wash my own car, but I haven't done any of that stuff for 20 years.
No, well, I kind of feel the same way. I purposely don't own a lawnmower, right? I don't own a vacuum. I have people come and do it, and I'm happy to give back to other people that need that work anyways, where I can focus on my highest and best use, because I know what I'm worth per hour when I'm on the phones making real estate calls. I know what my value is giving back in other ways. So unless you really enjoy those other activities, it really is, I love that you said that, because I think too many people don't give themselves permission to hire someone to wash their car, to hire somebody to go get their lunch, to hire somebody to whatever that might be, so that they can focus on the things that matter most to them.
I think in today's world, the other thing you can do, maybe hack number 2, is you can blur the line between your work and your hobbies or your pleasure.
Sure.
For example, a couple weeks ago, I went on a backcountry snowboarding trip, and we had 4 of our CEOs with us and 4 people from the office. So, am I screwing around or am I working? I don't know. I just know that the relationships with those 4 CEOs will actually never be the same now that we've been in the backcountry together.
Yeah.
Or Jeff and I, the CEO and founder of Stance. Last year, we raced a circuit together in cars. So we did the Pirelli Cup in Porsche Caymans. And so when Jeff and I are at COTA racing Pirelli Cup, is that work or play? Well, it feels like play.
Well, the best part of play, because then you can write it off on your taxes as well, right? Because it's actually work.
Yeah, but again, those relationships are never the same. They're changed forever.
There's something that if you travel with somebody, you experience life together, it's never. I'll give you an example. I met you through Andy McCubbins, mutual friend of ours, and Andy introduced us at a dinner. And Andy is currently buying 2 real estate properties with me right now. We are under contract out. And I met Andy on the first undercover op I did with Operation Underground Railroad in a hotel room in Cancun, Mexico, right? That was when I first met Andy. And now, we've been literally had each other's lives in our hands. And he became one of my closest friends and confidants. And now we're doing this business together. And I introduced him to a guy that's going to run his new sales team. And we were pushing business back and forth to each other. And we met literally traveling in Mexico doing other things, right?
There's something to be said for blurring business and pleasure around something like a jazz game.
Mm-hmm.
There's something else to be said for backcountry snowboarding, racing, skydiving, going to Lake Powell, or camping, or riding motorcycles through the desert together. When you take it to that next level, and it's really adventuresome, and when you're done doing it, you have a sense of pride, like you accomplished something hard. And a couple of these guys on the backcountry trip literally came to me afterwards, and they said, that is the most fun I've had in my life. That's the new high water mark. And so when you have that experience with somebody, it changes things forever. It's different than going to lunch. It's going on an adventure that changes the nature of your relationship forever. It increases the level of trust and understanding. And between investors and CEOs, sometimes that's the difference. I don't know if it's always the answer, but that's hack number 2, is you can blur the edges of your work and have some of your, if you just work and then it's 5 o'clock, yabba dabba do, punch out, get your golf clubs, go with your neighbors, and you never golf with your guys at work and you never see your neighbors at work, then I think that's a slight disadvantage.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfectly said. And I think we live in a time and an era where it's never been easier to seek out those opportunities, right? Like if you want to, it's almost lazy to not go do things like that. It's a lot easier to go golfing. It's a lot easier to go to lunch, but you put in real effort, but you build those real true relationships that are thicker than anything else you could do.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, I think that's awesome. Well, it's a pleasure for me to get to know you a little bit recently. And
what a great conversation.
Thank you. Absolutely look forward to going and doing something adventurous.
Let's do it.
Greg, thank you so much.
You're welcome.